Welcome back to Conversations with Great Minds. We're speaking with former Texas Congressman and 2012 presidential candidate Ron Paul. Congressman, you were talking about property rights as a system, a rigid system of property rights being the solution to that problem of externalities. And I'm curious how that would work in the real world, in the United States. Would we go to ExxonMobil and say, you know, your pollution is causing XYZ problem? I mean, how if the government doesn't enforce that, and I can't demonstrate that my cancer was caused by their product or by, you know, the upstream paper factory that the Koch brothers have or something like that. How do you enforce that right of my right to the property of my own body not being damaged by others putting their externalities into the environment?
Well, it's obviously never going to be perfect, but what we have today is pretty bad because the people who are most responsible get to write most of the rules and regulations. If you don't like the banking system, they get to write all the rules. But you set certain standards, you know, by previous cases. If a person is held responsible, then the next go around, they're going to have to pay attention to this. But I just think if you don't approach it this way, you lose total control of it. There's no objective way you can follow this through. But if there is somebody, I know it's simplistic to talk about somebody dumping garbage, and we can see it. And it is more difficult. It is more difficult when you know, you can't see it as easily. But in technology, you know, this day and age, it should be much easier to do this. I mean, there's in Texas, there's been a lot of things worked out in oil by property rights. Why big companies can't steal oil from the neighboring small farmer because of the property rights issue. And I still believe that is the best thing to do. I think it's real important, even in civil liberties. You know, if you look at the First and even the Fourth Amendment, the issue of civil liberties really is a property rights issue. If you want freedom of religious and assembly and press and speech, that's a property right. Your house ought to be protected, your home ought to be protected, and they shouldn't come in to invade us like they are now. The same way with the Fourth Amendment. It's a property rights issue. They have no right to search us and come in and take our papers and do all the things that they do because they're violating our persons and our property. If you say if you're careless with property, then it's much easier for them to come in and say, oh, well, we can still go in there and see what's on your telephone, and, you know, they justify all these other things that they do, but a strict interpretation of property rights would really help us in that area as well.
Well, the they that you're talking about presumably is government. What do we do when the they is corporate?
Well, they're not allowed to do it. I mean, if they commit fraud,
if they enforced?
Well, if a corporation pollutes, I should be able to go to court rather quickly and put the lawsuits on them and set precedents where they, you know, aren't allowed to do this. If they commit fraud, if they commit violation of property, should be a very severely punished crime. But in the Industrial Revolution, the corporations were polluting. No property right understanding. No court would listen to them. But if it had been started early on and set this as a precedent, we wouldn't have the problems that we have today because they didn't emphasize property and they drifted over to preemptive regulation. So everybody gets the regulation even if they haven't committed a crime. To me, that's like prior restraint on what you and I do or what the newspaper do, because you and I might cause harm. We might lie about people and do things and commit libel. But we don't want prior restraint. But if you put prior restraints on the corporations and they say 95% of them don't commit, you know, economic crimes or, you know, environmental crimes, why is it that all the penalties put on there on everybody rather than the people who violate the crimes? And I think, see, I want to treat, you know, freedom of speech and property rights and economic rights all the same. I'm a non-intervention in all areas. Otherwise, I feel like I'm inconsistent oh, okay, I will intervene here, but not over here because I like government over here, but I don't like government here. What you do is if you set up that I'm going to put prior restraint on everything a businessman does, why can't you concede to the conservatives, well, I'm going to make sure you don't smoke marijuana. That might hurt you. And I'm going to tell you how to eat and what you feed. And then when they get to do that, who takes over all the rules and regulations? It's the drug companies and the food companies. They write all the rules and regulations. So, no, I don't like prior restraint in the delivery of ideas or in products, but I severely punish those who cheat and steal and libel and slander. There should be laws against that, but we shouldn't, make excuses for them, let them get away with it. But a blanket accusation and a penalty placed on all businesses for everything they do doesn't work very well. Like I said, they end up writing the regulations. It doesn't work very well, and it's very costly. And one of the reasons why our companies will, additional charges, because just to open up, it might take them years and years and years to do it. And a lot of companies leave. That's why productive jobs aren't even in this country anymore. And why one of the contributing factors to the major crisis that we have today economically.
You've come back 5 or 6 times in our conversation to the notion that the companies, the drug companies, the pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, that they're writing the regulations, and I absolutely agree with you on that. The concept that a corporation should have rights, human rights under the Constitution, and that money should somehow be the same thing as speech and protected by the First Amendment was never voted by any legislature, state or federal, never advocated by any president. It was a doctrine that began in 1850 with the Dartmouth case in the Supreme Court, hit a kind of high point, 19th century high point in 1886 with Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, and then in the modern era in the 80s, Buckley versus Vallejo and First National Bank versus Bilotti, and then Citizens United. These Supreme Court created documents have made it possible, in fact easy, for these corporations to buy our legislators. What would be your solution to that problem?
Well, I think only individuals have rights. You and I have rights. The individual, I emphasize the individual, not the unit, the group, or a group of people. No, I don't. And just because the Supreme Court, ruled a certain way, they weren't all that good on the slavery issue and civil liberty issues and the Jim Crow laws over many, many years. So they were pretty bad as far as the courts go. Mm-hmm. So I think the individual has rights. I believe that an individual is born. I believe in natural God-given rights for the individual. The individual is very important, and we don't gain advantages or disadvantages because we belong to a group, and you shouldn't have privileges, and you shouldn't be able to skirt responsibility, but you happen to be corporate. You still have the responsibility, and if I are in the corporation, then we have responsibility. And I think some of that is still true in networking, TV and radio. The owners, have some responsibility as individuals. So, and if they don't, I would argue the case that they do. You can't skirt your responsibility and your liability because you're hiding behind a label.
So it sounds like you're suggesting that the idea of corporate personhood is a bad idea and you'd be opposed to it. What about the money as speech thing? How does a society, Thomas Jefferson wrote at some length about how great wealth would be destructive to a republic, because the influence and political power associated with great wealth would be destructive. And we didn't have the first, in today's dollars, millionaire in the United States until the 1790s. Those guys were well off, but they were not like today's billionaires. What would your remedy be for the things like Shelley Adelson, not to make it personal, but kind of bragging about investing in a candidate for president of the United States, saying, this would be good for my business interests. How do we deal with that? Because that's an individual, even though they use the corporate form to make those billions.
Well, in a libertarian society, government is so minimal, there is no reward for buying government because they can't pass out favor. There's no military-industrial complex. There are no bonuses and subsidies. You don't have Solyndras where you get some money from, and you don't all the R&D in every company and every medical procedure. It's all political. So that wouldn't exist. So it wouldn't be a very good investment if government were held to that of protecting liberty. But once it gets involved in the military-industrial complex, once it gets involved in regulating the economy, I mean, nobody can argue the case that the current system has done anything but make this discrepancy in wealth worse. But there's a lot of other things going on, too. You know, just the fact that you destroy money, you always destroy the middle class. If you study any monetary history, you destroy money, you'll destroy the middle class, and the rich get richer. But that doesn't mean that rich people are bad people. It means rich people aren't good people if they got their money through the manipulation of government. And this is what I think has happened. There's a big difference. If you're a billionaire because you build jet fighters and you give them away to the countries and you give them to Egypt and every place else where we're the biggest arms dealer, yes, that's wrong and they shouldn't be rich. But what if you're Steve Jobs? What if you produce a product and he became wealthy because you and I voted for him? This is pure democracy, is you get to vote for a product, and that will determine profits, it determines wage levels and everything else if somebody gets wealthy this way. But to put everybody together and say that if they're wealthy on their own and the people voted to give them their money and it was all voluntary, that is a lot different than people getting wealthy because they are on the inside track of the Federal Reserve. Most wealth now is made through the destruction of money. The rich, the bankers, the corporations, the government officials, the politicians, they all get to use this money first when it has value. By the time it trickles down to the average person, their cost of living soars, and it's much higher than the government admits. So it's very, very destructive, and that is a system that I detest, but I do not detest anybody having a good living if it's an honest living. No fraud, living up to their promises, and not taking any benefits from the government by coercing somebody else to pay for them.
Very interesting. We just have 30 seconds or so left. Can you give us a quick story about your new channel?
Oh yes, you know, the Ron Paul channel is just up and running for about a week now, and it will be something that will give me an opportunity to continue to do what I told you earlier, what I wanted to do in the beginning, was just talk about some issues. So I'm delighted that you had me on your program because I love the banter going back and forth. What's so disgusting in what's disgusting in Washington, usually we don't get honest discussion up there. It's all demagoguery and partisan politics. But I'm delighted you have me on tonight.